Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sur Eta Alpha Honor Society podcast, brought to you by the International Relations Department at Webster Vienna Private University. I'm your host, Sofia Opferkuch, Vice President of the Sur Eta Alpha chapter, as well as President of the International Relations and Diplomacy Club. Today's episode is titled Gender and Power Positions, and we're exploring how authority and expertise are negotiated within international diplomacy, particularly in fields where science, policy, and global environmental stewardship intersect. To shed light on these themes, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Stephanie Aktipis, a leading figure in science and environmental policy. Dr. Aktipis most recently served as Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of State within the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. Her work has helped bridge scientific evidence and diplomatic decision-making in global efforts to tackle biodiversity loss and climate change. Dr. Aktipis, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly a privilege to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Call me Stephanie, please.
Okay. Well, to begin with, could you tell us a bit about your journey? What first inspired you to pursue a career that bridges science and international diplomacy?
Yeah. So I am trained as a scientist. I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist and go to the bottom of the ocean. And when I was in grad school to do that, to be an academic, I found myself more interested in reading the news portions of the scientific journals and the policy portions rather than the kind of hard academic articles. And I didn't really feel fully fulfilled studying invertebrate evolution or the thought of doing that for the rest of my career. I learned of a fellowship program that takes, in the United States, that takes academics and kind of drops them into the federal government, assuming that they hopefully learn quickly, but don't necessarily know how the government works, and you sort of see how it goes. And I thought I'd try that and ended up really loving it. And I've been doing that for just over 15 years.
Wow. And so now that is a bit of your background. Tell us more about where you're from, what you studied, because I realized that we didn't do that at the introduction.
I studied evolutionary biology. I did my dissertation on the evolution of a large group of marine snails. I did take a year off in the middle of my PhD program to study essentially science policy. It was a program, I think it's still there. I think it was only in its second year at the London School of Economics. That was called Biomedicine, Bioscience, and Society. And it really took kind of the concept of looking at scientific issues, policy, and the humans that might be impacted by that. Everything from plastic surgery and the policies and politics behind that to reproductive, to issues, to environmental issues. They kind of tried to take that lens where when you layer on the science knowledge, the political decisions made, ideally using somewhat of that science knowledge and the human impact, what does that look like?
Truly inspiring, if I do say so myself. Now, you are a woman. So as a woman operating in high-level policy environments, did you ever become particularly aware of how gender influenced how your voice was received, or even how authority was perceived?
Yes. I mean, I think that, unfortunately, that's still going to always be the case. More in small ways than large ones. I was fortunate enough to work in areas that, if weren't equal female representation, at least in my bureau and my government and my issues were often, I think I've even been on delegations where we have certainly been majority female, if not exclusively. But when working with people from other countries or other issues or backgrounds, yeah, I've absolutely noted the slightly different dynamic and response to me being a woman, rather than that maybe they wouldn't have had with other male colleagues. But the thing about diplomacy is that at the end of the day, at least in the kind of official framing, everybody kind of has to like follow manners and mores and rules. So there is an expectation that there will be at least a certain level of behavior, and that makes things maybe both easier and harder, because you understand how you need to act in order to get things done and to move things forward, but maybe some of the less positive behavior happens sort of on the sidelines.
Which is ultimately hard because you have to keep in mind that you have a certain goal that you want to achieve, whether that be getting a document signed or a negotiation happen, and if that's...
Yeah, it can be hard. You also just sort of have to be more aware of it. And if you're thoughtful about it, it can also, to a certain extent, you can use that, you've talked about power, you can use that to shape your engagement on things. If you know how you are going to be, if you can anticipate how someone will react to you, if you kind of can play into that. There have been times when I've certainly been very comfortable working in accepting the assumptions I think people are going to make about me, and use that to kind of build relationships, and still at the end maybe surprise them because I will know a little bit more or come up with suggestions that might help us get to that final decision. So it's also how you really engage with your colleagues.
And maybe also use that to your advantage.
Yeah, totally.
Knowing how to use it and when to use it. So we're talking about power dynamics. So you work at the intersection, or you used to work at the intersection of scientific expertise and political decision-making in negotiation rooms where different actors stakeholders hold different forms of power, whether that might be technical, diplomatic, or economic. How do you establish authority and credibility?
It's really about relationships. And that's no matter where you're coming from. If you take the time to get to know people, at a very human level. Maybe you talk about your children. Maybe you go out and sing karaoke. Maybe you get coffee together. The more you have that shared relationship and trust, everything else can be built on that. You might be the person who may appear to have the most power in the room, but if you don't have relationships where people know that they can also trust you, that ultimately sort of weakens how far you maybe can take things. So thinking more about really recognizing and building that human connection can really go a long way.
So if we go maybe a bit more into a technical aspect, could you share an example of a moment when scientific evidence shaped an international agreement and how power relations within the negotiation space affected that outcome? Because, for example, at Webster Vienna, we don't have any science classes. So we do hear about these agreements, the goals, the UN goals, whatever it may be, but we don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
So moments, thinking about it as a moment, I think is a little misleading because it's very rare that there's a science moment. Usually there's an enormous amount of time building an evidence and an argument before there is really a scientific consensus on a different issue. In the international space, kind of the classic example where scientific knowledge and evidence led to international agreement is something called the Montreal Protocol. It's often described as kind of the granddaddy or the ideal multilateral environmental agreement. And scientists really in the 70s started saying, hey, the ozone layer, and I'm not an expert on this, so excuse if I butcher anything, but sort of the world's sunscreen layer, the globe's sunscreen layer is breaking down and degrading. We're not quite sure why, but as they did more research, they could identify chemicals that were in everything, refrigerators, air conditioners, hairspray. Like, I'm old enough to remember you weren't supposed to buy aerosol hairspray because it would release these chemicals that would kill the ozone layer. And when you kill the ozone layer, that increases and impacts humans. It increased skin cancer, eye issues, like really bad problems. So this was witnessed, and scientists were talking about in the 70s. By the 80s, government started to say, hey, maybe that we should do something about this, and maybe there's something we can do about this. And science actually had not just identified the problem, they had started to identify solutions, and businesses had also been able to come in. DuPont was one that said, hey, we think we can make a different chemical that will still do all the things we needed those other chemicals to do, but it's not going to have the same impact to the ozone layer. And that agreement happened in the late 80s. Now our ozone layer is healing, regrowing.
I saw that on the news.
And that's a huge success, where scientific evidence said, we see this problem. This is not a problem that one country can do itself. Problem. It is a collective problem. It crosses international boundaries. So we have to cooperate to do something about this. And so it really was one of the earliest international agreements really focused on environmental issues, and it still is making a difference.
So now that we are on the topic of climate and biodiversity, you were co-chair of the Biodiversity and Climate Change Assessment, where two areas deeply linked to questions of responsibility and justice. So if we now talk about gender, how do gendered experiences play into the global conversations about environmental crises, especially in communities that are most affected?
That's something else I think that the environment, so the UN has all of these different kind of agreements and negotiations loosely under its auspices. There are also agreements kind of not officially falling under the UN General Assembly, but in the environment and sustainable development spaces in the United Nations, there have, I think, really been a best practice. And I'm not sure it's always as consistent in some of the other areas, kind of other groups where they discuss different themes of issues, but for sustainable development, something called issues negotiated under the UN Second Committee, there are observer groups, stakeholder groups. There's one focused on women, there's one on Indigenous peoples.
That's interesting.
And in many of the other environmental agreements, those practices have carried over. So you have either stakeholder groups who join these meetings, and in some of the meetings they speak not equal to a government, but almost equal to a government.
I did not know this.
Chairs will, in the Convention on Biological Diversity, for example, there is an Indigenous peoples and local community group, and they speak after governments speak, but they speak and share their views on issues related to biodiversity loss, how it impacts their communities, how their communities can also bring potentially novel ways to address these problems and to maybe solve these problems. So in the Biodiversity and Climate Change Assessment, there really was a focus on making sure that we had female voices, we had Indigenous voices, we had groups who could really come and say, here's how we are experiencing this as well, and here's how we want to try to get involved to help solve it. And we're not unique in that. That's increasingly, I'd say, recognized in the international community, and governments and organizations are trying to ensure that representation is there, and that they're listened to and respected and included in the decision process. They should.
That's truly fascinating, because I am half Mexican, half Austrian, so I know quite a bit about marginalized communities or Indigenous groups, and usually, at least in Mexico, certain decisions that are taken by the government affect those communities the most. And they usually never have a voice, not even a say. They're not even part of it. They're not aware that it is happening. and to know that about it's fascinating. So at least we're moving in the right direction, I think.
And from the groups, the negotiations I've seen, and the biodiversity and climate change assessment, it was U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and all of those countries have Indigenous peoples and have different relationships with their Indigenous peoples, and we were trying really to make sure that those views and voices could be recognized. That's tricky. We don't always get it right, but there was an effort to do that.
At least you're trying. Yeah, and I'm a student, so I'm a senior student here at Webster Vienna Private University, and I am studying international relations, and I'm extremely passionate about diplomacy and everything that revolves around international relations. And so especially as a young woman myself, I'm 24 years old, and certain gender minorities, what role can they play in shaping future policy agendas?
I think as much as they can, pay attention and get involved. And the risk of sounding condescending, kind of be patient and start to not just know your perspective, but to know the perspective and the power dynamics and the places that you want to get involved. Because as much as a system might not be fair, might not be right, in my experiences, sometimes you're most effective when you can work within it, rather than just saying, let's come in and just stop everything. And I think there's value for both of those types of voices, and every person needs to decide how they feel that they can be most authentic, and how they can kind of best engage. But even if you're working from the outside, if you understand how something works, it's much easier than to criticize it, because you're truly informed. And it's sort of that, know your enemy, know the opposing views, know the system that you're trying to push back on, so you can kind of more easily find those places where you can get engaged and make a difference.
That's really, really good advice that I will definitely take myself. Now, since we're talking about empowerment and sort of leadership, many of our students ask how to build influence early on, especially when entering fields dominated by experienced or traditionally male voices. So, again, what advice, not the one that you previously said, but what other advice would you give young professionals trying to position themselves as credible actors in international policy spaces?
I think listening is one of the really kind of most important ones. Asking questions and listening. When I joined the government, I, in theory, was an expert in my very small field of snail biology or evolutionary biology. And I knew I was joining in a program and a system where I was given a lot of responsibility, but I was also kind of thrown into things. And the people who talked before they kind of understood the situation or understood the dynamics, it took a little harder for them to be effective. Listen and observe a lot. Find trusted, if you're lucky, you'll have a trusted colleague or mentor or someone who will say, maybe will give you some background information before you go in or after you go in to say a meeting or a discussion, and be humble along with what you're doing. Don't be afraid to show your expertise, but if you can ask questions rather than show up with what you think is the answer, sometimes that's going to help people be more responsive to you.
Thank you for that. I wrote everything down that you just said on my little paper. So now if we move on to a bit of a personal reflection. Now, you've been working on global challenges for quite a few years now. and that can be both empowering but also very emotionally intense. How do you personally maintain resilience while operating in high pressure, often politicized environments?
I've been lucky enough to have relationships and have good friends in that same system. So we can kind of always find the absurdity of whatever I might be doing. Laugh, find ways to
find the joy,
find the fun. Be it, not that this officially ever happens, but be it having your own little bingo card of what words come up during a negotiation. You can be very respectful and think that I've seen colleagues, and
it keeps you entertained, engaged also, like actively listening.
Yes, absolutely. I've had, again, heard rumors of people saying, well, can you fit this expression into your intervention?
That's amazing.
We'll give you a coffee or a candy if you can fit this term in somehow. So some of that, these are all by people who take their work very, very seriously and are working very hard. But when it's like 3:00 in the morning or you've been doing really long hours, having that camaraderie and dedication and cooperation, both in the official and kind of the fun, can be really, really valuable. And then just like taking a break and getting away from it, unplugging from your email. I'm not good at that, but trying to do that is really important as well. What everybody always says, try to sleep, try to exercise,
read a book,
touch grass.
Yeah. Put your phones away and touch some grass.
Yeah. All those things count too.
Because, you said this in the beginning. At the end of the day, we're all human, and you try to find these connections with other humans, and everyone is struggling in their own way, but they're still doing their job to the best of their capabilities. So
share pictures of children or pets or
food.
Food. Bring sewing kits. I always have little mini sewing kits when I'm at these meetings, because I once had a wardrobe situation.
That's really smart. I'm also writing that down, by the way.
And I've learned, and it has been used. I had colleagues have to tear a pair of pants, they tore their pants and had to pull out my needle and thread to repair it. Those types of things really can go a long way.
Okay, perfect. So throughout your career, have there been moments when you became consciously aware of your own growing influence or leadership power? And how did that shape your sense of responsibility?
I don't think I was ever aware of it in the moment. Okay. It was always afterwards. That's in my kind of thinking back on my kind of career pivot moments where I've picked up more responsibility. I didn't always realize it until it was over. Somebody asked me to do something and I'd say yes to it, and then that maybe led to other opportunities and increased responsibility. But not really until after it's finished was I like, oh, you're right, okay. Then that's so I don't tend to think about power or influence. I tend to think about, how do I get the job done, and how can I get that job done in a way that reinforces relationships and institutions and moves things forward in a productive way for ideally everybody involved. So right in that minute, I don't think, oh, I'm going to go do this thing. Unless the only times I think where I have been aware of it is when as a manager, if I had members of my team were, put in difficult situations, that's when I would know that it was my job to step in or give them cover. So I'd say those were the only times when I'd really rely on my, no, let's get this, let me fix this.
Also, first of all, you doing this podcast right now is also taking leadership role from a senior person that has had senior positions, and that is a woman, and that is an empowered woman at that. You're a hardworking mother, a wife, daughter, a granddaughter, you know, and there's a lot of people and an amazing friend, and there's a lot of people that admire you. I say I'm the first in line because we've known each other for quite a while now, and you've taught me so much about a lot of things that I will be eternally grateful for. Not that I get teary-eyed on a podcast. And I remember, like, you were there from the beginning of Webster, and you've helped me. Like, I've had crash outs and crises, and you're like, no, Sofia, you're gonna get through this. You are good. Don't worry. So it's also a lot of your community and those people that you might not work with, but that sort of like admire you and rely on you. And
thank you, Soph.
Yes. So speaking about all of that, how do you personally then balance, if you're an ambitious person, if you are hardworking, but also self-care that isn't, if you have a very demanding career?
I'm terrible at self-care. I'm trying to get better at it.
Okay.
It's you only have so much time. I think that women of my generation, there was a point where it was like, oh, you can have everything. Or maybe just before I was really entering the workforce. I think that's crap. You can't have everything, but not at all at the same time. And I think accepting that and recognizing that, like, sometimes the focus might be your career, sometimes the focus might be your family, sometimes the focus might need to be yourself, and finding the things that can help you get through the hard parts that you might need. Like, I know I need to move to, just for my general mental health. So exercising is one of the things I prioritize, but it's kind of self-care, but it's just sort of a requirement. But the idea that women need to, that they should aim to be able to have everything. I'm hoping that people are getting away from that perspective and starting to think about how do you juggle the different stages of your life rather than it all at the same time.
Which is, I mean, doing this podcast is so important for that, because you're openly talking about that. And other women listening, or other people in general, might hear you say those words and say, like, actually, I relate and I feel the same way. So thank you for sharing. Now, I see you as a mentor, but were there any mentors or pivotal moments that shaped your professional path?
Yeah, I mean, I've got lots of mentors. My mentors really, though, are not people that I've kind of officially paired with. They're just people that I maybe a little bit more advanced in their careers, that I have connected with, and never even really said, like, oh, will you be my mentor, but would call if I needed and just feel out, what do you think about this? Should I do this now? So mentors are important. And I think for me, the ones that have been the most helpful have been more organic rather than in sort of a structured system.
Yeah.
And then the pivotal moments, like, I didn't know what those moments were until after.
Okay.
And one of my mentors, actually, when I was debating doing something, taking on more work, that would have been a lot, and she said, you need to do this now because it will set you up for more opportunities later. And I was like, okay, right, yes. I did it, and she's
right.
like, you're not going to know what that thing is, but it's going to set you up to be able to get that. And she was right. It did set me up to pivot and kind of get a promotion and get a management role. And if I hadn't done that project, I'm not sure things would have ended up where they did. So it's, sometimes you just have to
also take advice.
Yeah, take advice. Yeah. It doesn't mean saying yes was the right thing for me at that time. Sometimes saying no is also the right thing and can set you up for other opportunities later. But not, sometimes I think not forcing it is just as good as, or even better than trying to kind of map things out.
Now, I mean, we're changing a bit the subject with this next question, but I feel like it's really important because you are a scientist, and oftentimes these scientists use terms that the commoners do not understand. So how do you bridge the gap between scientists and policymakers who often, quote unquote, speak different languages?
Yeah, I'd say honestly, scientists and policymakers are both pretty bad at speaking their own languages.
Okay.
So it's not even them talking to each other.
Okay.
Sometimes them talking to each other can work okay, but I think both it's communication to the public. So sometimes it's
you're right. Yeah.
less being exactly precise down to the 10th decimal and being okay with something being a little bit mushy, rather than exactly, as appropriate in these certain circumstances, then we will do this policy. It's, I used to work on coral reef issues, and it's finding a way to take something that your grandmother can understand, maybe someone who's never seen a coral reef can understand. And I had colleagues who could talk about the number of species being lost and bleaching and what that actually means, and get very, very wonky. But what does that matter? But they could also turn around and say, well, in the Florida Keys at the last hurricane, if they had not been surrounded by coral reefs, here's how much further the water would have risen up into the city. Here's how many more homes would have been flooded.
I did not know coral reefs did that.
Yeah, no, coral reefs they're a natural barrier for flooding and hurricane resistance, because the waves hit them and stop and get pushed back out. So finding those pieces where you reach that audience and you kind of make it relevant to someone that applies, rather than just sort of yammering on about species lost or water temperature or something that seems very technical. That's the lesson.
It's something that I sometimes do when I'm trying to learn something for an exam. To truly understand it, I try to explain it like I would explain to someone that either does not know anything about it or is a 5-year-old child. And if you can explain it in simpler terms, then that makes it, okay, you got it, and then you just have to fit in the appropriate terms or definitions.
Make it relevant to them. And scientists and policymakers both need to be able to do that. And also in kind of the international negotiation space, in the actual, sitting and doing diplomatic discussions and negotiations, having an understanding that, maybe introducing a scientific term. I was once in a negotiation, and my technical experts from some of our technical agencies wanted us to throw in a very sciencey term, and I don't even remember what the term was. And we were trying to add it into the text that we were going to agree upon, and colleagues from other countries, the word didn't translate because it was very technical, and we all would speak in these smaller groups, speak English as we were sort of hashing things out, but they would need to be able to go back and explain to their technical experts or their governments in their respective language, and that didn't work because they're like, we don't understand what this is. And I couldn't understand what it was because I kind of knew the term. So things like that, not being always wedded to the exact precise term, or if you are, knowing that you have to educate people on it, and that takes time. And then also remembering that there are 7 official UN languages, and knowing that different words have different context and connotation in different languages. So finding the word that is okay with all of those official languages can take time too. And being aware of that's just generally communication and not so much science and policy. But that was something else that I remember having to really learn along the way.
I mean, that's also something that you don't necessarily learn in the classroom, which you have to just dip your toes, or however you use the expression, and just try it out and see, okay, this is actually how you do it in the real world. So speaking about that, it fits perfectly into my next question. I'm so happy about it. Because we're at a university, what are the most valuable skills or soft skills you found in your career that aren't taught in a classroom?
Judgment.
What do you mean by that?
That is, and one of my early bosses said more than anything else, she looks for judgment. And I remember thinking, I don't understand what that means. And the further along I worked with her and eventually when I was a boss, I was finally like, oh, I understand that. And it's kind of intangible, but it is that knowing when to speak and when to keep your mouth shut, knowing how to present yourself, knowing how to communicate. You know, do you send off that angry email? Do you post the angry tweet or the questionable photo? And it's not self-censoring. It's just kind of like, how do you make decisions, and what do those decisions,
like, how will they impact?
How do they impact other people? How are you able to engage with people? You know, how can you best adapt to a circumstance? I've had people who work for me who would prefer to communicate on Teams or by email, and that's fine, but if you're trying to resolve something, there's a lot that can get lost when you're just looking at typed text.
For sure.
And when they'd come to me and say, well, I can't solve this, they're not being reasonable, I'd say, have you picked up the phone? Have you tried to actually talk to them?
Yeah.
And so it's judgment like that, too.
Which is also, I think, a problem. Speaking about that, it's a problem of our generation, too. Everyone is so scared to speak on the phone. And everyone is like, no, let me just send an email. And I'm like, just go to, it's next door.
Yeah.
The person is next door to you. Just go and talk to them in person. Yeah. And I struggled with that a lot until I realized how quickly you can get things done if you just call. Even the doctor's appointment was terrifying. Now I'm getting better at it. But you, again, have to try it.
Especially if you're new and young in the workforce. You're working with people who are terrible with Teams, who forget to look, who don't know what Slack is, who don't know how to get around on Slack. So you can help teach them, but they can also help teach you. It's a lot harder for people to be rude to you face to face and even phone to phone than it is
that's also good advice.
By message.
That's also really good advice. So one of my last questions before we go into the closing segment, I'm in my mid-20s almost. I'm turning 25 in a month and a half. So if you could go back to your early or just 20s in general, what advice would you give yourself before entering international diplomacy or the field that you worked or have worked in?
I think I would have told myself, and I know I told my students.
And I'm writing this down, by the way.
Don't do things because you think you should. And if you start finding yourself using that word, use that as kind of a yellow flag to really investigate why you think that. And
can you repeat it? So don't do things
that you think you should. So, for example, when I was in college, I thought I should do an honors thesis.
Yeah.
I did it. Did it make a difference in the long run? No. Did it make a difference in the short term? Maybe. I couldn't do fun things with people. And maybe it did make a little bit of difference in the long run because people I did the thesis for wrote letters of recommendation for grad school, and maybe that helped me. I don't know. I don't regret doing it, but it's worth making sure that is actually the right thing. We would hear a lot my husband and I lived with undergrads for 4 years, and we'd hear students say, well, I should apply to law school, or I should do a thesis, or I should do this thing and that was usually when we'd say, well, why? Like, should you really? I should do an internship over the summer. Yeah. Or why? Should you? Is it better for you to make money and take brain break?
Now that you mentioned that, you've told that to me many times. Many a times.
So it doesn't mean don't do it, but like really like think that through. I went to grad school because I thought I should, because that was the path that I thought made the most sense because of what I thought I wanted to do at that time. I didn't have to go to grad school right away. I just didn't know what else was out there, and I didn't take the time to think that through. I don't regret any of the decisions I made. They've all sort of, so far, gone fairly well. But sometimes there are probably times when I could have done less, and it would have been okay.
Well, listen up, people. You heard it here first. Write it down. So now, before we fully wrap up, I would love to end with a few more light, rapid-fire questions related to gender and power positions. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
And these are not prepared, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so coffee or tea during long negotiations?
Both at different times. And eventually I always have to cut myself off and go to water or else I'll never sleep. But coffee first in the morning, transitioning to tea, kind of lower caffeine throughout the day, and then just water. And even if it's, 3 a.m., overnight. I did once sleep in the UN because my badge expired and I was going to get kicked out and they needed me the next day. So I spent a Friday night at the United Nations.
Okay.
And it
Smart
gets
move,
to the
though.
point
Smart
where you
move.
have to just switch to water. Or I always have to switch to water.
And what kind of tea?
Black
Matcha?
tea to start with. Usually it's going to be whatever's easy. So it's often like whatever's available. And in some countries, because I'm kind of a coffee snob, the tea's better. So then maybe I just drink tea
instead of...
it's usually more often black tea with milk.
Okay. What about an energy drink?
No. Maybe a Diet Coke.
Okay.
If I'm desperate.
Okay.
Earlier in the day, but no energy drinks.
Okay. And do you think it does matter who controls the coffee break? Like in negotiations, if there is a coffee break.
I don't know if I've ever actually seen a coffee break. I think the chair of the negotiation, like there is like a set time that it ends and then people go to a coffee. So that doesn't really matter. But sometimes using that to talk to other people, sometimes going to coffee even outside of the negotiation. Coffee is a very helpful tool in diplomacy. It's when I first started this is getting too long, but my friend at the time said, you kind of have to think like you're going on a lot of first dates and they're all going to be for coffee.
Okay, another good advice.
I don't understand that, but okay. And then I started having these coffee meetings to get to know my counterparts to build the relationships. And then I was like, oh, I understand the first date. Like it's not romantic, but it's that small talk. Where can we connect to find common ground to build that relationship?
Exactly. I mean, I am experiencing those myself. For example, with my thesis supervisor, Professor Dr. Franco Algeri. We've had 2 coffee meetings, where we talk about my thesis, and he treats me always to coffee, which is so nice of him. And it's just a bit more relaxed, less stuffy than in an office, sitting down. So, good advice. Now, there's next question. I'm going to break it down into 2. So, is there a woman or a gender diverse figure living you would love to have dinner with?
Oh, living?
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's a yes to that. I just have to...
Okay. Think about that.
Okay.
The second question is historical.
Well, Jane Goodall just died. Oh, she would be
that
somebody
is such a good
really
answer.
Amazing to have dinner with. And the scientist who got me interested in this, Eugenie Clark, also known as the Shark Lady. They would be 2 people really fun to have dinner with. And slightly different but overlapping generations. So that would be fun.
Is Eugenie Clark, is she still alive?
She is not still alive.
Okay.
She died in the early 2000s, I want to say. Really amazing woman. Just so cool. She's the reason we know a lot of what we know about sharks.
But now how about a living?
A living woman. I'm trying to think of listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yes, you do.
And I'm trying to think of a woman that I would really love to just pick their brain. And I'm struggling with that right now.
I mean, you could also
Shamefully.
say me.
Oh, I could say you. Barbara Kingsolver would be. She's
You
one of my
love
favorite
her.
authors.
Yeah.
She would be really lovely to have dinner with, I think.
That's a good answer.
I think she'd be somebody that I
you've
would...
read-
Oh, and Bobby Brown. I'm very interested in Bobby Brown right now. Her kind of business perspective. I think she'd be interesting to have dinner with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Her products are
business,
amazing.
Pushing envelopes.
Yeah.
In people's world. So
not Millie Bobby Brown, but
No,
Bobby Brown.
Bobby Brown.
Good. Because I think the
makeup
generation
conglomerate.
that I'm in
Not
will think Millie
Bobby Brown. Although
Okay.
she seems adorable and has a animal farm, and I found that very interesting.
She adopted a child
Did she?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that part. Wow.
with Jake Bon Jovi. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so she seems fascinating, but not somebody I'd be like,
Okay.
let me learn from you.
Okay.
I'd be more like, tell me about your animals. I'd learn that. That'd be fun.
Okay. So we have living Bobby Brown or Barbara Kingsolver, maybe together.
Totally
Could be fun.
different people. Could be really interesting.
Could be really interesting. And historical Eugenie Clark, Shark Woman, and Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question before we fully stop yapping, as we say in our generation. If you could describe the future of diplomacy in 3 words, what would they be?
I think interesting. I think still people-focused. And relationship-centered. That's more than 3 words.
I would say relationship-centered and people-focused is
kind of the same concept.
Yeah.
And I think more important than ever.
more important.
I think as people sort of get used to living behind computers,
Yep.
we need to
Or
also
social media.
have engagement, direct engagement, and not just UN international diplomacy, but just talking and listening.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Stephanie Aktipis, thank you so much for sharing not just your expertise, but also your reflections on yourself, leadership, identity, diplomacy, science, and also navigating your influence in international diplomacy and talking about gender and power positions. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Sir Eta Alpha Honor Society podcast. Stay tuned for more conversations with individuals who shape global decision-making and expand what leadership can look like. Any last words?
No,
Stephanie.
thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you. Until next time, I am Sofia Opferkuch, wishing you courage not only to enter global spaces, but to also shape them.